And our last paper for today is by Kari, who works for Chem Center in Forensic Science Lab in Australia. And her paper is on the strength of trace evidence, 2 case studies where unusual trace evidence has impacted legal proceedings.
Sorry about the long title. Basically, I work for the state trace lab evidence in the physical evidence section. The Forensic Science Lab is just one of the labs in the Chem Centre. We are the state government lab and responsible for the large range of scientific services. This is a picture of our brand new building, which is also on Curtin University campus. So we have access to students to do our research, which is fantastic. And we also have access to their tavern, which is even better. So the first case I will talk about is one that I worked on in 2008, 2009. It's the death of Stephen Rowe. In this particular case, the accused as well as a number of the witnesses were juveniles. So I will be using pseudonames as there is an order from the trial judge and also the appeal judge to not release any information which may relate identification. So basically, on the evening of Friday the 31st of October, the information we received as to what happened on our request for analysis, there was a verbal disagreement between 4 people in a park. This escalated to a push and shove, during which one of the people involved in the push and shove was hit over the back of the head with a timber stake. The 2 persons, the one that was being in the push and shove and the person that alleged to have hit Stephen, then ran in opposite directions. The 4th person, who I will call Rick, fearing Stephen would be further assaulted, dragged him under nearby bushes and called friends for help. The friends then conveyed Stephen to a hospital where his family attended. He did not regain consciousness and unfortunately died when his life support system was turned off 5 days later on the 5th of November 2008. Now, submitted to Chem Centre for physical evidence were fibre. They requested fibre and wood analysis, the 2 timber lengths and clothing from both the accused and the deceased. So the 2 lengths of wood, DR5 and DR6, were located within the actual park where the incident occurred. These are photographs of the wood, the 2 halves of the wood, which as they were presented at trial, and my thanks to the crime scene officer for those photographs. Now, these were searched by myself using the stereo microscope and showed silvery trails, which I assumed as snail trails, and also some visible signs of wear. In addition to the snail trails and small amounts of dust, I found 3 red particles midway up the length, which can be seen. These images were taken down the stereo microscope. Now, these were found on DR5, about halfway up one of the stakes. Now, these red particles were very, very small. I analysed them on our microdiamond cell by FTIR, and they were predominantly calcium carbonate, very crumbly, and with an acrylic binder. As you can see, the calcium carbonate basically overloads the binder itself. Now, on the shirt of Stephen, I shook it out, and within the shakings, whilst I was looking for wood, I found small red crumbly particles with entrained black cotton fibres within them. The scale on the last photograph, the 2 black lines are 1 millimetre apart, so it is quite small. Now, trying to establish what these red particles meant, I had to remember the case details. It happened Halloween. The POI, or the accused, was dressed as a zombie. And he was actually covered in red fake blood. On his red fake blood, within the red fake blood, very crumbly in appearance. It was also all over his t-shirt and all over his jeans. I figured that this might be the source for the red particles on the wood and within the shakings of the clothing of the deceased. So I analysed these and compared them to in both the red particles using microspec and comparison microscopy and FTIR, and basically came up with the conclusion that they were all consistent with each other. So I did a small investigation into fake blood, not knowing very much about it. I hadn't come across very much of it before. I'd done paint cases, but never fake blood cases. Looking at the way it crumbled and the way it behaved, I thought it might be a face paint rather than a gel-like fake blood. But I went out, got some very strange looks, purchased some exemplars, and also got told a recipe. If any of you are interested, I can tell you how to make your own homemade fake blood if you ever want to go dressed as a zombie anywhere. I have that in my possession. And I did some short simulation experiments. So I bought 2 100% cotton black t-shirts, cut them up and applied the fake blood to certain areas, let them dry, and then analysed them using FTIR and also looked at the optical microscopy to see if I could get the entrained fibres like I had in the recovereds. So basically, the fake blood within the actual case was applied wet. Upon drying, I did get clumps, which did have the entrained cotton fibres that I was seeing. None were as crumbly as the case exhibit. Mostly were a lot more flexible. However, there was also not as much wear. These were stationary for a large amount of time rather than running around a park. And basically, the substance that was used on the POI, the accused t-shirt, was not fake blood, but a face or a body paint, an unknown brand, but contained high levels of calcium carbonate, which did indicate that it was quite a cheap formula. It was not consistent with any of the exemplars in ingredients such as the presence of kaolin, which was quite significant in some of the exemplars that I found. However, it did behave similarly. So John was charged with murdering Stephen John Rowe on the 5th of November, remembering that was the date that his life support system was turned off. The Chem Centre physical evidence report was completed September 2009, and the trial was held in the Supreme Court, which that is a photo of the Supreme Court in Western Australia in October. Now, during the trial, John admitted to hitting Mr. Rowe, claimed self-defence. Rick, the friend of Stephen who had dragged him under the bushes, had a known reputation as a bully, and a large amount of witnesses testified to this fact. In addition, there was minimal witnesses which implicated Stephen in any forms of violence. And there was also a large amount of testimony as to the history of John, the accused's victimisation, including high school videotapes that were uploaded to YouTube of him being bashed, causing him to leave the actual high school where he was. In addition, there was no DNA evidence. The POI, the accused and the victim, did not have any DNA usable evidence on their clothing. The timber stake was sent for DNA after I'd done my examination, and the fracture match had been, before the fracture match had been done, and they did not find any usable DNA. So DNA was not a factor in this particular case. I thought I would just bring a brief rundown as to the ideas and the outline of events that the trial judge accepted as his opinion as to what had happened. So on the night in question, the 31st of October, there was a large number of groups of youths aged between 16 to 19 were out in the area of Woodvale, which is an upper suburb of Perth in Western Australia. These groups were involved in drinking and antisocial behaviour, including breaking windows, fighting, loud noises, typical antisocial behaviour. John walked his girlfriend home from a party that they had both attended, and upon leaving her house, he picked up a stick for his own protection. On his way back to the party at a friend's place, he joined a group which included Alan. Now, Alan then received a phone call from James, who had told him that he'd been mobbed by Rick, so the friend of Stephen, and a group, and was now hiding and needed help, and told him to come and find him. John then accompanied Alan to go and search for James and to rescue him. In the meantime, Rick and Mr. Rowe and other members of the group had consumed substantial quantities of alcohol and there was a large situation within a group at the BP service station where there was a fight and a passing police car stopped and the group scattered. Rick then came across James and resulting in what the trial judge described as an unprovoked assault, including a headbutt. During this assault, Mr. Rowe, Stephen, arrived and James fled. Now, the trial judge then found Mr. Rowe went in the same direction taken by James and was followed by Rick. And he also found that they were both searching for James. Alan and John, who then obviously responded for the call for help from James, then unexpectedly came across Rick and Stephen in a dark pathway within Timberlane Park. There was then an altercation between Mr. Rowe and Alan about a previous alleged assault. During the confrontation, Stephen had Alan in a chokehold, a throat hold, using his collar, and drew his fist back in what the trial judge described as a possible assault. It was at this point that John then struck Mr. Rowe to the back of the head with the wooden stake, splitting it in half, causing Mr. Rowe to fall to the ground unconscious. Alan and John then fled, and Rick pulled Stephen under nearby bushes and called friends to take him to hospital. The trial outcome. After trial by jury, John was acquitted of murder and also acquitted of the account of manslaughter. He was, however, convicted of a recent one-punch law called unlawful assault causing death. This was a new charge within West Australia that was legislated by the state government in response to a large number of one-punch deaths or king-hit deaths, as they were reported in the media. And unlike manslaughter, this particular offence can occur in an accident, and there was no need to prove that the death was a foreseeable circumstance. The trial judge stated that John's crime resulted from the use of excessive force in which would otherwise have been considered a self-defence case. He was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment, which was suspended for 2 years. So basically was free to go from the court after having served 94 days prior to the trial. The DPP, which is the Department of Public Prosecutions, appealed the leniency of this sentence. However, this appeal was dismissed in 2010. I believe now that John has moved interstate. I think he now resides in the eastern states. There is still the suppression order in place. However, everyone that was there that night, everyone that was involved in the case, all of Stephen's family, all of Stephen's friends still know the POI. The second case study is the death of Pauline and the serious injury of Anthony Freeman. Pauline and Anthony Freeman were walking home from an evening out at Bally's Bar, which is a local pub in Balladura, which is a suburb of Perth, when they were hit by an unknown vehicle whilst crossing Kingfisher Ave within Balladura at approximately 9:30 p.m. on Friday the 19th of February 2010. Pauline was flung clear and came to rest on the footpath to the northern side of the carriageway, She sustained serious head injuries and whilst was conveyed to hospital later died. Anthony was carried on the vehicle along Kingfisher Ave and onto Jacana Parade before separating from the vehicle and coming to rest on the sealed surface, a distance of approximately 500 metres. He sustained serious internal injuries and neck injuries, but has recovered. The driver of the vehicle involved failed to stop or report the crash. However, at 8:30 a.m. on the 20th of February, the driver of the suspected vehicle attended Mirrabooka Police Station. After the event, the driver, Mr. Louis Markey, drove the silver Ford Falcon XR8, owned by his employer, to a friend's house in Beachborough, which is about 10 minutes away from Balladura, where he parked it in the carport and walked home. Police seized the ute from the Beachborough property and towed it to the police facility for a detailed forensic examination. Just a quick side note, that photograph I got off a news website. I don't think that police officer knew he was being photographed doing that. So the trace evidence that was submitted to Chem Centre was control glass from the vehicle windscreen, glass from the bin in the driveway where the car was located, and the outer clothing of the victims. So the t-shirt and shorts of Mr. Freeman and the dress and t-shirt of Pauline. The control glass that was submitted in a small yellow top plastic jar was a pale green laminate windscreen glass. The glass that was recovered from the bin where the car was deposited was a tinted laminate with a pale green glass and a black spotted coating on one side. And the clothing of Mr. and Mrs. Freeman were examined, and abundant glass fragments, including some with that black coating that was found on the glass in the bin, which was not present on the control, was located. In addition, a number of shirts and some clothing items from the alleged driver were submitted for glass examination. However, this was negative. We did not find anything on them. Black remnants were also submitted. This is a photograph of the windscreen as examined by Major Crash and the crime scene investigators. It was heavily damaged to the passenger side, and there was 2 bits of black embedded material recovered within the windscreen. These were collected and sent to Chem Centre for analysis. These were identified as a polyurethane substrate with a foam-like appearance and a dotted surface pattern on one of the remnants. The case officer requested identification and raised the possibility of being parts of the vehicle, like the windscreen wipers or some other plastic part within the vehicle. I went in a different direction to the vehicle and thought that the bumps could be a pattern to increase friction and that the foamy appearance could be for impact reduction. Based on these observations, I requested the shoes of the victim. The shoes of Mrs. Freeman were not consistent in colour or texture to the remnants. The left shoe of Mr. Freeman appeared similar but did not have any comparable damage. Hence, I asked for the right shoe. Upon examination of the underside of the right shoe, a small nick in the arch was located. Examination using a stereo microscope resulted in a physical fit of the black remnant with the nick of the shoe. The result indicated that the right shoe had contacted that windscreen with sufficient force to impart damage to the shoe and embed the remnant in the windscreen. Progress to date. Louis, the accused driver, submitted a plea of not guilty in 2010, April. He reappeared in July 2010 with a trial scheduled for the 25th of July 2011. I completed my report on the 4th of November 2010. On the 4th of July 2011, Mr. Marquet pleaded guilty and is awaiting sentencing. The district court was told he was also at Bally's Bar drinking with friends and was seen leaving and driving up to 75 kilometres per hour, that's 46 miles per hour, in a 50 kilometre zone. He will be sentenced in August. So In the first case, there was minimal DNA evidence. However, trace evidence established a strong link between the accused, the weapon, and the deceased. He admitted but claimed self-defence. In the second case, there was strong evidence in the form of physical fit and abundant glass fragments, and the accused has now pled guilty. So, in conclusion, trace evidence was a valuable resource in the criminal proceedings of these two serious and yet tragic events. I'd just like to say thank you very much for having me, and to thank you to Dave Tatata and Reece Power for the preliminary glass work on the hit and run case. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for any of our speakers today?
You talked about buying I was wondering about the sampling of the glitter you got, because when I think of glitter, I can think of like buying at an art supply store and getting very big sort of glittery pieces like you would use in a art project, or glitter in like cosmetics, which I would assume is much smaller and finer. So I was just wondering where you bought the glitter, or what kinds of samples you bought.
Yeah, it was more cosmetic type of glitter.
Thank you. Thanks to all of our speakers.